Haz al-Din, possibly the most misunderstood political commentator on the internet today. He's often derided as reactionary, fascist, even racist, and all these other labels. I don't think any of these are true, but one criticism levied at him that I think is true is that the way he explains his theory, the way he explains his thoughts, is very dense and very hard to dig into as someone who's not well versed in theory, like myself, for example. This has led many to accuse him of having either an incoherent ideology or not having an ideology at all. I think this is false, and I intend to elucidate the actual substance of his theory in a very simple way for you today. After having watched him for years, read his Substack, looked into the book recommendations and other things that he has put forward, I believe I've come to an understanding of his theory, and I can put it in a very simple way. This is Haz al-Din theory for dummies. I've broken this down into 4 essential points that I think are the most key point. This isn't the totality of everything that Haz thinks. It is merely the most essential points. Point number 1, hegemony. Hegemony, in Haz's view, which is derived from the Gramscian idea of hegemony, is a objective, totalizing structure of society that encompasses law enforcement, political parties, financial institutions, social media, and the mainstream media. What this functions to do is to reinforce the status quo, organically replicate the status quo, almost the way an organism replicates itself. Meet the new boss, same as the old. Number 2, one's political position is not reducible to opinion, but must focus on how one relates to hegemony. Imagine, for example, a police officer, and this police officer is enforcing the laws, even laws that he himself disagrees with in his head. For example, he might agree that marijuana should be legalized, but the hegemony disagrees, so he enforces the law anyway, objectively, in his position, in his career, in how he actually functions within our society. He is pro-hegemony. To clarify, this is about his position within the hegemony and how that doesn't necessarily one-to-one relate with his political opinion. The exact political opinion used in the example isn't necessarily relevant. Number 3, partisans. So going beyond the mere individual, we come to collectives of individuals that have a certain objective interest. A modern-day example of one such partisan group would be the militia movement, for example, in Oregon. They all share a collective interest in resisting things such as eminent domain, gun laws, and other means of control from the hegemony. And this gives them an objective interest that is in contrary to the hegemony. And number 4, partisan politics then should focus on identifying these partisan groups, identifying and analyzing their relationship to the hegemony. Some partisan groups would be pro-hegemony. Some partisan groups will be anti-hegemony. And this, as with point number 2, is not decided by their mere political opinion in regards to that hegemony. It's an objective stance based on whether or not their concrete interests align with the hegemony or not. An example of how we could apply this outside of the modern times would be African Americans in the 1950s and 60s, specifically the Black nationalist movement. We could say that this Black nationalist movement, due to the way the hegemony saw African Americans as second-class citizens and mistreated them, from the standpoint of the African American community and the Black nationalist movement, in the way they had to organize themselves for their collective interest, it was counter-hegemonic by its very nature, both intentionally and unintentionally. So bringing this forward to modern times, and so we come to the most controversial aspect of Haz's theory, MAGA communism. MAGA communism is reached by applying the analysis that we just went over to the MAGA movement. For Haz, the base of the MAGA movement, that is, not everything that's ever had the MAGA label tacked onto it, but very specifically the working class and potentially the smaller petit bourgeois elements of the MAGA movement, represent a counter-hegemonic force due to their interest in resisting the hegemonic takeover and the expansion of the hegemony through these digital apparatuses, social media apparatuses, and these this sort of global banking structure as well. For Haas, conclusion here is not to vote for Trump or support Republicans or do any of that kind of thing, but rather to provide a political education to this counter-hegemonic movement that he sees forming in MAGA. And this political education comes in the form of Marxism-Leninism. And there we have it, Haas al-Din theory for dummies. Now, we can hopefully, if you disagree with him, I personally find a lot of insight in his political ideology, but if you disagree with him, now you can get to criticizing him on the merits of what his actual beliefs are and not on these made-up accusations of being a fascist or being a racist or a reactionary or any of these other labels that are thrown at him. Instead, we can actually criticize his actual ideas. I hope this was enlightening for you. I hope you maybe give Haas a second look if you are someone who dismissed him out of hand before. And I hope if you're someone who's still critical of Haas, that you can begin criticizing him on the merits of his actual beliefs. Thanks for watching.